Hey guys, it's Miss Young. We're going to take notes over Reconstruction. Our last class we discussed the battles and events of the Civil War and got to the point where we discussed what was going to happen to bring our country back together, and now we're going to get into the details of reconstructing the United States. So let's get started. So we're going to start out with some pretty important information. The next three amendments that we add to the Constitution. Remember, in order for an amendment to be added to the Constitution, remember, amend means to change. In order for these to be added, however, the Congress had to agree upon them. And so these passed Congress. Our first amendment is the 13th Amendment, which ends slavery. 10% of the southern states had to ratify. Ratify means approve. Okay, 10% of the southern states had to ratify the 13th Amendment in order to join the Union. This was created by a radical Republican Congress. Radical meaning extreme, like really way out there in the ideas of being a Republican. So that was the trend within Congress, and they passed the 13th Amendment. The next amendment is the 14th. The 14th guaranteed citizenship to all blacks and protection of the Bill of Rights. Okay, so 13th is where they're freed. 14th, now they have citizenship. And the 15th Amendment is where all men get the right to vote, regardless of race, except women still cannot vote. That's the 19th Amendment. That hasn't happened yet. All right, pause if you need to take care of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Again, remember, 13th they're freed, 14th they're citizens, 15th they get to vote. All right, so now we need to decide or learn about how did the South react to these amendments? How do they respond? Were they cooperative, or did they rebel once again like they did when Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860? So these are some of the reactions. So start writing these down, and I'll give you some explanation. Also look up every once in a while so that you can see the pictures that come in. It's going to help you give a visual of the information that I'm talking about. So when we start out, you need to know about the Black Codes, or the Jim Crow Law. And this limited the effects of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. It was passed by Southern state governments, and the goal of it was to strip the blacks of any rights that these amendments gave them. How they managed to find loopholes in all this, I really have no idea. And so you can kind of see here how, yeah, we're letting them have a water fountain, but they're not going to use the same one as the white men do. And even women still were not even allowed to drink out of those water fountains. Like, it was so extreme that it was just the white men who were able to partake in some of these luxuries. But they weren't denying them rights, they were just denying them the good version of these rights. The next topic you need to know about is the KKK. Sorry, let me back up just a second. This is a picture that kind of shows you some of the signs that you would have seen under the Jim Crow laws in the South, where it's not like we're not letting them use your restroom. They just have their own restroom to use, or they have their own seats to sit in. And as usual, whatever was used for the colored people or the black people was not as good as what everybody else got to use. All right, so now we can move on to the KKK. This is a group created during Reconstruction. They violently opposed the freedoms of the blacks. A lot of time they would, find a black man and murder them. They're responsible for lots of murders that really haven't come out. There's actually there are people who are members of the KKK that is very secretive, because if people knew that you were a member of the KKK, it could completely ruin your political career. I mean, it's people are that deep into this stuff. So it still exists. The Constitution allows them to have the right to assemble together. That's one of your First Amendments, one of your rights in your First Amendment. And so, yeah, it still exists, but they still have to abide by the laws. Murder is still murder, and it's still against the law. Being violent is still against the law if you're causing harm or potentially going to be causing harm. And so just because it exists doesn't mean it gets to do whatever it wants to. but it started during this time period. Now we need to know about scalawags. Scalawags are Southern Republicans, so they're Southerners who liked what was going on. They liked the fact that the Republican Congress was bringing in these 3 amendments and trying to free the slaves. And the Southerners who didn't like what was going on, they considered them to be traitors. And you can see right here, this is kind of, so this guy is the scallywag. This guy here, he is the carpetbagger. And the reason we call him a carpetbagger is because if you look at their bags are made of carpet. These guys were Northerners who were sent to the South to handle the new politics and make sure that they were following through with the new implementation of the amendments and allowing the blacks to partake in, you know, and use the rights that everybody else was getting to take advantage of. Okay, so make sure you've completed all of those topics. Pause if you need to, and move on when you're done. All right, so now we need to, so you need to flip your notes over, and let's take a look at how did the Civil War actually affect the South. So in the beginning of Reconstruction, it was extremely important that the South actually joined back in with the Union, because what was happening is the South had, their currency had no value. Okay, their banks were failing. In the battles, they had their land destroyed, the roads were destroyed, homes were destroyed, crops were destroyed. There's an increase in the price of food because, well, all the crops were destroyed, and there's no way to receive food unless it was by other countries coming in, bringing in these imports. Okay, so the South was struggling really bad because of the war, and they needed the Reconstruction in order to survive. Something else that they had going on in the South was the Freedmen's Bureau, and this was, they brought relief and educational activities to refugees and freedmen. Okay, freedmen are what we refer to as the freed black men. And they also would take the land in the Confederacy, kind of just confiscate it, and we are going to, you know, try to rebuild it. And then finally, the third part here is the Reconstruction Act of 1867, and this is where the military would occupy the South and enforce guidelines, enforcing the guidelines that the South had set before them in order to be able to re-enter the Union. So the Reconstruction Act is where they made sure they used military to make sure that that took place in the South. So here are just some pictures of what was going on in the South, and so you can see the destructive, how the destruction of the buildings. Okay. There's a train, obviously off its tracks, or maybe on a different set, but it is completely broken down. You see the broken building next to it. Again, another railroad track broken. So there you've lost your transportation of goods, lost your transportation of food, any lumber to come in and rebuild the buildings, any bricks that would need to come in, bringing in food, you know, just to help feed the people who have lost their crops. So go ahead and wrap up this slide and move on when you're done. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a few other things that took place during Reconstruction. So we had the Homestead Act of 1862, and this allowed all citizens to claim, any citizen of the U.S. was allowed to go and claim 160 acres, and this included free slaves. This was a really big opportunity. Okay, so imagine you've been a slave, you didn't own anything for yourself. You finally get set free, and now all of a sudden you hear this news that you can go and go out west to the unclaimed land, and if you can claim 160 acres, you live on it for 5 years, and you make it prosperous, which means you can grow your own food, you have your cattle, you have your home, it's set up, and it's you can live off of it. It was yours. And that's what a homestead is anytime you can have a chunk of land, make it prosperous, live there for a few years, and it's going to be yours. You will be able to own it. And this is what stimulates settlement in the West. Then we have the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Congress passed passed this to protect racial minorities like the blacks and maybe even the Mexicans and even maybe some of the immigrants that we had coming in on the East Coast, especially in the northern states with the factories and all that. Two things here. All men and women are considered citizens under the Civil Rights Act. Not Indians, okay, they're not citizens yet. And secondly, all citizens have certain rights, and that being the Bill of Rights is what they're referring to. Finally, we have a gentleman by the name of Hiram Revel Rhodes. He is the first black man to serve on the U.S. Senate, and he was a senator for Mississippi, which, by the way, that was the seat that Jefferson Davis had prior to becoming the president of the Confederacy. And so when the South became part of the Union once again, they had to fill the seats of Congress, and Hiram Revel Rhodes filled that seat that Jefferson Davis had once filled. So kind of a neat, it's really kind of neat if you think about it. Mississippi being one of the southern states, and they put in a congressman that is black. I think that was a really big step. So wrap up these notes and move on when you're done. All right, so finally we need to take a look at one last little box, and that is sharecropping. Sharecropping was this cycle of debt that started when blacks were trying to start an income but did not have any money or land to do so. So remember, like I said just a minute ago, that you didn't, when you're a freed slave, you have to find a way to make money because now you're responsible for getting your own home. You're responsible for getting your family fed. What are you going to do? We got to make money somehow. So what do? They got to go find a job. Or maybe they can get some land to make it prosperous. And so what happened was, especially in the South, the kind of people who were willing to let these freedmen or these black men use land kind of got them trapped in this cycle of debt. And let's see what that looks like. So take a look at these pictures. So step one was a sharecropper, okay, that would be the freed black man, receives land and seed, and in exchange, he would promise the landowner half of the crop. So you get an acre, let's just say an acre. You get an acre of land, and so half of the acre you get to sell for profit. The other half you give to the person who let you borrow the land and let you have the seed. Oh, it seems pretty nice, right? Thanks, dude. This is maybe I'll make something of myself. Yeah, let's just wait, okay? Because here's what happens next. The sharecropper buys food, okay? So you got this freed black man. He's like, okay, I got my own land, so now I got to buy food, I got to buy clothing. I don't really have any money yet, so I got to go to the landowner's store, okay? Because usually they would have some sort of surplus of stuff. So you go to his store, and you have to buy it on credit, which means you don't have the money, but I owe you later, right? Okay, this is where it all starts. So now the sharecropper, okay, the freed black man has food, he's got clothing, he's got land, he has seed, but he's in debt. He owes this guy money for the food and clothing. He owes the guy for the seeds and borrowing the land. But let's just wait a minute. Hopefully we'll grow crops and get to pay him back. Right? So let's see. So the sharecropper plants and harvests crops. Yay, go me, right? We're so excited. Look at me being a farmer. You still owe somebody money. So let's see what happens. All right, so the sharecropper, okay, that's the freed black man, gives the landowner his crop to sell. So we had an acre, right? So he pulls all of his half acre of earnings, gives it to the landowner that he's borrowing it from, minus the debt he had accrued over the year for the clothes and the food and the seed. Geez, do we have any money left? I don't know. So let's look. So when settling up, the landowner says, oh, dude, you still owe me something and you ain't got nothing left. I guess that means you're going to have to stick around another year and try to pull a profit next time. And, so you owe me more this go around because you weren't able to pay me off. So let's see what our final step of the cycle. So in order to pay the debt, the sharecropper, that's the freed black man, promises the landowner, okay, I'll give you a greater share of next year's crop. Okay, well, so then next year, if the cycle continues, then before you know it, a few years goes by, you get zero profit from the land because you're having to pay your own debt into this landowner that you're borrowing the land from. Okay, so let's take a look at the cycle all together. So all I did really was copy and paste. So so he could get a closer view. But it just continues. It's a cycle. Okay, and so it even says right here, by the time the sharecropper had shared their crops and paid their debts, they rarely had any money left. A sharecropper became tied to one plantation, having to work until his debts were paid. So yet again, he's a slave to his debt. He's not a slave to the person, but he's a slave to his debt that he's now accrued. So wrap up this last part of the notes and wait for further instruction.